Everyone knows I love to receive a nice email from Mike Cohn. So let's take a moment and review this email. It says, a recent Gallup survey found that 80% of employees who received meaningful feedback in the past week are engaged at work. For comparison, Gallup's overall engagement numbers are often around 30%. That's a striking gap. It suggests something many leaders overlook. Performance may depend less on changing team structure and more on improving feedback inside the structure you already have. When results lag, organizations often reach for the org chart. This reorganized team, redraw reporting lines, or debate how many teams a coach or scrum master should work with, and it causes tension and confusion. Sometimes those changes help, but they rarely go far if feedback is infrequent, unclear, or missing altogether. Feedback isn't just a management technique, it's a strategic advantage. And agile teams have been building that advantage into the way they work for years. When people talk about 1 or 2 week sprints, a sprint cycle, they usually focus on speed. We need to move faster. We need more output. We need shorter release cycles. But speed is not the real advantage of short sprints. The advantage is shortening the timeline between acting and learning. A sprint isn't a delivery cycle, it's a feedback cycle. Each sprint gives the team a natural point to stop and ask, did we in fact build the right thing? Did we misunderstand the need? Are we still aligned with stakeholders? Are we learning what we hoped we'd learn? The shorter the sprint length, the shorter the gap between the assumption and the validation of the assumption. And that's not about velocity, that's about reducing risk. Early Scrum teams often work like this. Sprint, 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 release. Sprint, 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 release. That pattern made sense at the time in the 1990s or early 2000s. It was a huge improvement over what we had before. But it meant some feedback arrived in a big, delayed batch after the release happened. Over time, many teams evolved to sprint, release, sprint, release. And today, many modern teams have gone even further still. They release whenever it makes sense, sometimes multiple times per sprint, sometimes many times per day. In other words, modern agile teams have largely decoupled sprints from their releases. So sprints are not primarily about shipping anymore. What are they for? Sprints provide a reliable cadence for feedback and alignment, even when delivery happens continuously. Many organizations treat the sprint review, however, as a demo. It's not. It's where reality gets a vote. So let me explain this to you. The sprint review is where the team inspects what was built with the people who care about it and adjusts course based on what we've learned. When that meeting becomes optional, rushed, or performative, you don't just lose a ceremony, you lose your learning loop. And you start optimizing for finishing work instead of for finishing the right work. If weekly feedback really is one of the biggest drivers of engagement and performance, as Gallup's poll indicates, then the sprint review isn't overhead. It's how you reduce rework, prevent expensive surprises, and stay aligned with what actually matters. Short cycles are what create opportunity. Of course, simply running 1 week sprints doesn't guarantee meaningful feedback. Stakeholders can skip reviews, they can ignore output, they can ignore input. The conversation can stay superficial. Short cycles create the opportunity for feedback. Leaders decide whether to use it. That's where the advantage lives. If you're running 1 or 2 week sprints, ask yourself, are we using sprints as a delivery deadline or as a learning deadline? Because the real power of Agile isn't producing more every 2 weeks, it's learning more every 2 weeks or producing the right thing. And that's a competitive advantage that will help you succeed with Agile. Mike, I couldn't agree more. I feel like sometimes we're misusing or misaligning sprints. Oftentimes I explain that a sprint is a container and that the velocity is a unit of measurement of how much quantity, how much volume fits inside of this container. If you think about it from that perspective, different people working on different teams means that the volume that fits inside of the container is different, but the container is still a 2 week sprint. So if you have 1 2 week sprint that has multiple experienced people on it, they may be finishing more work than a separate container that has more junior folks on it, and they might be finishing less work, smaller quantity, smaller volume, but still in the same size container. So it's not so much about managing or governing the size of the container as it is about gaining an understanding of what workflow can go through that team each sprint and how we can track that velocity or that metric of how many stories or how many units can be done so that we can give forecasting with confidence to leadership and others within the organization. That's going to do it. And thanks, Mike, as always, for a wonderful email. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care. Bye now.